24 hours after I buried my wife, the woman who gave him life, who sacrificed everything for his future, my son stood at my doorstep asking for money, not condolences, not an apology for choosing his mother-in-law's birthday celebration over his own mother's funeral. Money. I watched his entitled expression crumble when I simply smiled and closed the door. What my son didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the man who had quietly built their comfortable lives knew exactly how to dismantle them, piece by calculated piece. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. The black suit felt foreign against my skin as I adjusted the tie for the third time. Margaret had always been the one to fix my ties, her gentle fingers working the silk into place while humming some half-remembered melody. "There," she'd say, smoothing the fabric against my chest. Perfect. Nothing felt perfect anymore. I picked up her wedding ring from the dresser, the simple gold band that had lived on her finger for 35 years. The hospital had given it to me in a small plastic bag along with her other jewelry, but somehow that felt wrong. She should be wearing it. She should be here, fussing over my appearance, reminding me to take the scenic route to avoid traffic. The taxi idled outside, its engine a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the empty house. I slipped Margaret's ring into my jacket pocket, right over my heart, and took one last look around our bedroom. The indentation on her side of the bed was still there, a small geography of absence that I couldn't bring myself to smooth away. The driver was an older gentleman with kind eyes who helped me into the back seat without unnecessary words. As we pulled away from the curb, he glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Funeral?" he asked gently. "My wife," I managed. He nodded, understanding everything in those two words. 38 years married myself. Can't imagine. He adjusted his mirror slightly. "Take all the time you need, sir. No rush today." As we pulled out of the driveway, I found myself studying the neighborhood through different eyes. These streets had been our world for 20 years. That corner where Margaret would wait for the school bus with Robert, chatting with other mothers while he shifted impatiently beside her. The park where we'd walk every Sunday morning, her hand in mine, planning our week ahead. She'd loved those walks, loved the way the light filtered through the oak trees she'd watched grow from saplings. Margaret had been my anchor in every storm. When I'd lost my job in the recession, she'd held me while I cried into her shoulder, then helped me write my first freelance proposal the next morning. "You're brilliant," she'd whispered. "The world just needs to see it." Within 2 years, my consulting business was thriving, largely because she managed every detail I overlooked. She was the methodical one, the planner, the one who turned my scattered ideas into sustainable success. My phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment my heart lifted. Maybe he was calling to say he was already at the church, that he'd driven down early to help with arrangements. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded strangely cheerful. "Listen, I've got some bad news about today." "Bad news?" I felt my stomach tighten. "Yeah, so, remember Jessica's mom? Well, today's her 60th birthday, and Jessica's family has had this huge party planned for months, like catered, extended family flying in the whole 9 yards. He paused, and I could hear children laughing in the background. "The thing is, if we don't show up, it's going to cause major drama with Jessica's side of the family, and you know how that goes." I stared out the taxi window, watching familiar streets blur past. "Robert, today is your mother's funeral." "I know, Dad, and I feel terrible about it. But here's the thing. Mom would understand. She always said family comes first, right? And Jessica's family, well, they're family too now." His voice carried that practiced reasonableness he'd perfected over the years. "Besides, it's not like Mom will know if I'm there or not." The casual cruelty of those words hit me like cold water. Not anger, I was too numb for anger. Just a hollow recognition settling in my chest. "Jessica's grandmother is 93, he continued, filling my silence. "This might be her last big family gathering. Mom always taught us to think about other people, remember? Robert, look, Dad, I know you're upset, but try to see it from our perspective. We can have our own memorial for Mom next weekend. Just us. More personal, you know? Today's going to be all formal and sad anyway." The taxi driver's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a question in his gaze. I looked away. "So you're not coming," I said quietly. I really can't, Dad. I'm sorry. But hey, save me some of those little sandwiches they always have at these things, okay? He laughed, actually laughed. And maybe we can grab dinner next week and talk about Mom, share some good memories. All right, son, I said and ended the call. The funeral home smelled of lilies and old wood, a scent that would forever remind me of this day. Margaret would have hated the excessive floral arrangements. She always preferred simple daisies from our garden. But the director had assured me this was appropriate for a woman of her standing in the community, and I didn't have the energy to argue. Richard, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached me with tears in her eyes. You know, just last week, Margaret was in my garden helping me with those stubborn rose bushes. She had such a way with plants. Her voice broke slightly. I keep thinking I'll see her out there tomorrow morning with her coffee mug, checking on her tomatoes. She loved that morning routine, I managed, watching as the funeral director adjusted the flowers around the casket with practiced efficiency. Jim from my old consulting firm squeezed my shoulder. Remember that Christmas party when Margaret brought those gingerbread houses? She spent hours on them, and my kids still talk about it. 3 days she worked on those, I said, straightening my tie again. The fabric felt foreign against my neck. Kept shooing me out of the kitchen. Linda from Margaret's book club approached, clutching a tissue. She saved my marriage, you know. When Tom and I were going through that rough patch last year, she'd call me every morning. 1 day at a time, she'd say. 1 page at a time. I nodded, my throat tight. Around us, more people were arriving, removing coats, speaking in hushed tones that somehow made the silence between words feel heavier. Oh, Richard, Janet from the volunteer group called out, her voice pitched carefully low. I don't know how we'll manage the children's reading program without her. Those kids adored her voice. She made every story sound like magic. She practiced at home, I said quietly, watching an elderly man I didn't recognize sign the guest book with shaking hands. In front of the mirror, said every child deserved to hear adventure in their ears. Mr. Chen, the pharmacist, approached hesitantly. Your wife always asked about my daughter's medical school applications. Even during her treatments, she'd remember. How's Amy doing with her MCAT prep? That's the kind of person she was. She kept notes, I whispered, feeling Margaret's wedding ring press against my chest through my jacket pocket. About everyone, birthdays, grandchildren's names, worries you'd mentioned once. As people filtered into the chapel, I could hear conversations flowing around me like water around a stone. The funeral director caught my eye and nodded toward the sanctuary doors. Richard? My sister Carol touched my arm gently. She glanced around the chapel, filling with faces, people whose lives Margaret had touched in ways I was only now fully understanding. Where's Robert? Shouldn't he be sitting with us? I looked at Margaret's casket, surrounded by genuine love and mourning. Her son was somewhere else eating birthday cake. He's not coming, I said quietly. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the emptiness that had settled into every corner of the house. Margaret's funeral had been beautiful in its own way. The pastor spoke about her kindness, Linda read a poem from their book club, and nearly 100 people shared memories afterward over coffee and sandwiches I couldn't taste. People had asked about Robert throughout the reception, and each time I'd simply said he couldn't make it, watching their expressions shift from understanding to confusion to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret's jewelry box, sorting through pieces I wasn't sure what to do with, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Robert's familiar silhouette bouncing slightly on his feet, the way he'd done since childhood when he was excited about something. Dad! Hey! He burst through the doorway the moment I opened it, his face bright with enthusiasm. You won't believe the party we had yesterday. Jessica's mom absolutely loved the surprise video we made. We got her whole family singing happy birthday in this crazy harmony, and then he paused, finally noticing my expression. Oh, right. The funeral was yesterday too, wasn't it? How'd that go? How did it go? I repeated slowly. Yeah, was it nice? Good turnout? He was already moving toward the living room, pulling out his phone. Actually, perfect timing because I need to talk to you about something. Jessica's car broke down this morning, transmission or something expensive, and we really need to get it fixed before her maternity appointment next week. I was thinking maybe you could. Robert, I placed my hand gently on his arm, stopping his forward motion. We buried your mother yesterday. I know, Dad, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there. But like I said, family obligations, you understand. He waved his hand dismissively. Anyway, about the car situation. You chose a birthday party over your mother's funeral. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. Come on, Dad, don't make this into a bigger deal than it is. Mom's gone, okay? She's not going to know whether I was there or not. But Jessica's family, they're very much alive and very much keeping track of who shows up for important events. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I studied my son's face, the casual dismissal, the complete absence of remorse. Important events. Look, I get that you're upset, but you need to be practical about this. Uh, Jessica's pregnant again. We've got a mortgage, and now this car thing. I'm dealing with real problems here. He pulled out his phone again. So about that transmission, the mechanic said it could be anywhere from 3 to 5,000. I was thinking we could split it. You cover 3, we'll handle the rest when Jessica gets her next freelance check. Get out. What? He looked up from his phone, genuinely surprised. Get out of my house. Dad, come on. Don't be dramatic. I said I was sorry about missing the funeral. What more do you want? His voice took on that practiced reasonableness I'd heard so many times before. Besides, you raised me to be responsible to my family, right? Well, Jessica and the kids are my family now. I walked to the door and held it open. Get out. Seriously? You're going to throw a tantrum because I missed one day? He shook his head, but I could see uncertainty creeping into his eyes. Fine, but when you're ready to act like an adult about this, give me a call. That transmission isn't going to fix itself. I closed the door in his face and turned the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a moment, clearly expecting me to change my mind. When I didn't reappear, he finally walked back to his car, shaking his head in apparent disbelief at my unreasonable behavior. For the first time in 24 hours, I smiled. As Robert's car disappeared down the street, memories flooded back. He hadn't always been like this. The change started when he met Jessica's family, people who lived beyond their means and wore expensive clothes like armor against their insecurities. Jessica's parents drove leased BMWs they couldn't afford, threw elaborate dinner parties funded by credit cards, and spoke constantly about maintaining appearances and investing in relationships. I remembered the first time Robert brought Jessica home, how she'd wrinkled her nose at our comfortable but modest furniture. This is so authentic, she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. Within months, Robert was asking us to co-sign for a house in a neighborhood that stretched his budget, then for money to furnish it appropriately. They're young, Margaret would say whenever I suggested we needed to set boundaries. They're figuring things out. Remember when we were starting? But we had started with nothing and built slowly, carefully. Robert and Jessica wanted to start where we had ended up after 30 years of work. Every family gathering became a subtle presentation of their latest acquisitions: the upgraded kitchen, the private school fees, the family vacation to Europe that Jessica's parents insisted on paying for, but somehow required our contribution for incidentals. I'd tried to talk to Margaret about it 3 years ago, when the requests became monthly occurrences. They're taking advantage, I'd said. We're enabling this lifestyle they can't sustain. He's our son, she'd replied, her voice carrying that gentle firmness I knew meant the discussion was over. If we don't help them, who will? But Margaret wasn't here to shield them anymore. The man who had quietly built a successful business from nothing, who understood the difference between want and need, who had been overruled by love for 32 years, was finally free to act on his own judgment. And my judgment was very clear. 3 days passed in blessed silence. I used the time to go through Margaret's things properly, to sit with my grief without interruption, to remember what it felt like to make decisions without constantly considering how they might affect Robert's ever-expanding needs. I was beginning to understand that the quiet in the house wasn't just absence, it was peace. On Thursday evening, my phone rang. Robert's name flashed on the screen, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. I wanted to see if he'd learned anything from our last encounter. Dad, thank God you picked up. His voice was strained, lacking the casual confidence from our last conversation. Listen, I've been thinking about what happened the other day, and maybe I came on too strong. I know you're grieving and all. And all, I repeated. Right. Look, I talked to Jessica about it, and she thinks maybe we should sit down and have a real conversation. Clear the air. She feels terrible about the funeral thing, too. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a breath. The thing is, we really are in a bind with this car situation. Jessica can't get to her doctor appointments, and with the baby coming, Robert, we just need a little help to get back on our feet. I mean, Mom would want you to help us, right? She always said family comes first. She'd be heartbroken if she knew we were struggling and you weren't. Stop. The word came out sharper than I intended. Dad, I'm just saying, she's dead, Robert. The silence that followed was profound, and your mother is dead. She died 3 weeks ago while you were too busy with your other family to visit. She was buried 4 days ago while you were eating birthday cake. She is dead. Dad, don't. My voice had dropped to something I barely recognized. Don't you dare use her name to manipulate me. Don't you dare invoke her memory to justify your greed when you couldn't even be bothered to honor that memory when it mattered. Jesus, Dad, I know she's dead. You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel bad about missing the funeral? His voice cracked slightly. But she's gone, okay? And the rest of us are still here dealing with real problems. Mom always understood that. She would want us to move forward, to take care of the family. The family. I sat down heavily in Margaret's reading chair, feeling the worn fabric that still smelled faintly of her perfume. You mean Jessica's family? The people who taught you that appearances matter more than substance, that wanting something is the same as deserving it, that love can be measured in dollar signs. That's not fair. Your mother spent the last 10 years of her life protecting you from consequences. Every time I wanted to say no, every time I thought we should let you figure things out on your own, she stopped me. He's learning, she'd say. He needs time. She believed that if she just loved you enough, if she just gave enough, you'd become the man she raised you to be. She did love me, and I loved her. Love? The word tasted bitter. You loved what she gave you. You loved that she never said no, never asked uncomfortable questions, never demanded that you stand on your own. But love? Love shows up. Love makes sacrifices. Love doesn't choose a birthday party over a funeral. Dad, please. She's dead, Robert, and with her died the woman who stood between you and the consequences of your choices. She always believed you'd grow up eventually, that you'd learn to value what really matters. But I can see now that as long as someone was there to catch you, you never had to learn to fly. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. So what are you saying? His voice was smaller now, uncertain. I'm saying the bank of Mom and Dad is permanently closed. I'm saying it's time for you to discover what you're actually worth when no one is propping you up. I'm saying that the next time you need money, you should call Jessica's parents and see how much their love is worth in actual dollars. You can't be serious. Your mother always believed that love and respect went hand in hand, Robert. Thus, she gave you everything because she respected the man she thought you could become. But respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. And you lost mine the moment you chose a party over her funeral. I hung up and turned off the phone. Outside, it had started to rain, and the sound against the windows was like applause. 2 weeks of silence had given me something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Perspective. I'd been going through Margaret's photo albums, decades of memories carefully preserved, when I noticed something that should have been obvious years ago. In the recent photos, birthdays, holidays, graduations, Robert's family appeared less and less frequently. Oh, they were there for the gift-giving occasions, the moments when their presence guaranteed some kind of return on investment. But the quiet Sunday dinners, the random weeknight visits, the times when Margaret was simply lonely and wanted to see her grandchildren, those photos were noticeably absent of their faces. I was in the garage, finally tackling the project of organizing 30 years of accumulated tools and equipment when I heard car doors slam in the driveway. 2 doors. Through the window, I watched Robert approach the front door with Jessica beside him. Her expression set in what I'd learned to recognize as her serious business face. The doorbell rang with unusual persistence, three sharp bursts that suggested urgency or entitlement. Dad, we need to talk. Robert's voice carried through the door before I'd even opened it completely. Jessica stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. Richard, Jessica began before I could respond, we need to discuss this situation like adults. This tantrum of yours has gone on long enough. Tantrum, I repeated, stepping aside to let them enter. Margaret had raised me to be polite, even when politeness wasn't deserved. Yes, tantrum. Jessica moved into the living room as if she belonged there, settling into Margaret's reading chair without invitation. You're upset about the funeral, and I understand that. We all understand that. But you can't punish an entire family because of one scheduling conflict. Scheduling conflict. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd never learned. Robert shot Jessica a warning look, but she was already in full stride. Look, Richard, I know you're grieving, but you have to be realistic about this. We have obligations, real financial obligations that don't disappear just because you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. Jessica, Robert started, but she waved him silent. No, Robert, this needs to be said. Your father has been helping us for years, and suddenly he wants to cut us off without any warning. We have a mortgage, Richard. We have car payments. We have a second child coming. You can't just stop. That's not how families work. I sat down slowly on the couch, studying these two people who had consumed so much of my life's energy. Tell me, Jessica, how do families work? They support each other. They help each other through difficult times. They don't abandon each other over one mistake. Her voice rose slightly, gaining confidence. Margaret would be absolutely horrified by how you're acting right now. Would she? I leaned back, feeling oddly calm. Let me ask you something, Jessica. In the 5 years you've been part of this family, how many times have you and Robert visited us without needing something? That's not. We visit all the time. For Christmas, because we host dinner and give gifts. For the children's birthdays, because we provide the venue and the cake and the presents. For family emergencies, which seem to happen monthly, because we provide the solutions. I paused, watching her expression shift. But when did you last come by just to see us? When did you last bring the children for a simple Sunday afternoon because they wanted to see their grandparents? We're busy people, Robert interjected. We have jobs, responsibilities. So did we. My voice remained level, but something cold was settling in my chest. We worked 60-hour weeks building our business. We had our own responsibilities, but we made time for the people we loved. We prioritized relationships over convenience. That's not fair, Jessica said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. Fair? I stood up, walking to the mantel, where Margaret's favorite photos were displayed. Let me tell you about fair, Jessica. Fair is spending $40,000 of your retirement savings on a house down payment for children who visit 3 times a year. Fair is paying $15,000 in student loans for a daughter-in-law who can't remember to send a thank you card. Fair is watching your wife struggle through chemotherapy treatments while your son is too busy with his new life to visit. Dad, that's not. Fair is lying in a hospital bed asking where your son is and having to tell your dying wife that he's probably just caught up at work. Fair is planning your own wife's funeral alone because your only child can't be bothered to help choose the flowers for the woman who gave birth to him. The room had gone very quiet. Jessica's hands were fidgeting with her purse strap. And fair, Jessica, is standing in a funeral home surrounded by neighbors and friends and strangers who took time out of their lives to honor your wife's memory, while having to explain to person after person why your son, her son, couldn't find the time to say goodbye. We explained about the party, Robert said weakly. It was important to Jessica's family. Important to Jessica's family. I turned to face them fully. Tell me, Robert, what's important to your family? What have you ever sacrificed for us? What have you ever given up for the people who raised you, who supported you, who believed in you even when you repeatedly disappointed them? Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but I continued. Do you know what Margaret used to say when I questioned whether we should keep helping you? They'll grow out of it, Richard. They'll learn. She defended you through every crisis, every request, every failure to show up. She believed that if we just loved you enough, if we just gave enough, you'd eventually understand what family really means. I moved to the window, looking out at the garden Margaret had tended for 20 years. But you never learned, did you? You learned that showing up earned you money. You learned that emergencies meant windfalls. You learned that our love could be measured in dollars and favors and bailouts. But you never learned to love us back. That's not true, Robert said, and for the first time his voice cracked. We love you guys. Do you? I turned back to them. Because love shows up, Robert. Love makes sacrifices. Love doesn't weigh the value of a birthday party against a funeral and choose cake. Love doesn't ask for transmission money from a man who buried his wife alone because his son was too busy networking with in-laws. Jessica had gone very pale. Richard, you're being unreasonable. We're sorry about the funeral, but we can't change that now. We need to move forward. We need to think about the future. You're absolutely right, I smiled, and it felt strange on my face. We do need to think about the future, your future, without us subsidizing it, without us enabling your lifestyle, without us pretending that taking is the same as giving. Dad, please. For 32 years, I watched Margaret pour her heart into you, Robert. I watched her defend every poor decision, excuse every selfish act, justify every disappointment. She believed that unconditional love meant unconditional support. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's exploitation. And you've been exploiting her goodness for so long that you can't even recognize when you've crossed the line. We haven't, Jessica started. You missed your mother-in-law's funeral for a birthday party. The words hung in the air like a judgment. You asked for money from a grieving widower 24 hours after he buried his wife. You used that dead woman's name to manipulate the man who loved her most. If you can't see how that crosses every possible line, then Margaret was wrong. You'll never grow out of it because you don't want to grow out of it. You want to keep taking without giving, keep benefiting without earning, keep being children supported by parents until the parents die. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The clock Margaret had bought at an estate sale, saying it reminded her of her childhood home. So here's what's going to happen, I said finally. You're going to leave. You're going to figure out how to pay your own bills, solve your own problems, and support your own family. And if you ever want to have a relationship with me again, you're going to start by learning how to give instead of take. You're going to start by showing up without needing something. You're going to start by honoring the memory of the woman who loved you more than you deserved. Robert looked stricken. Jessica looked angry. And if you can't do that, I continued, then you're going to stay away. Because I would rather have no son than a son who thinks love is a transaction and family is a business arrangement. I walked to the front door and opened it. Margaret protected you from consequences your entire adult life, but Margaret is gone, and I'm done protecting you from the person you chose to become. They left without another word. Through the window, I watched them have what appeared to be a heated argument in the driveway before driving away. 6 weeks passed before I heard from them again. 6 weeks of genuine peace, of rediscovering who I was without the constant drain of their needs and demands. I'd started volunteering at the library where Margaret used to read to children, continued her work in the community garden, and slowly began to understand what retirement might actually look like when it wasn't constantly interrupted by financial emergencies that weren't really emergencies at all. I was pruning Margaret's rose bushes, a task I'd never had to do before, but one I found surprisingly meditative when Carol called. Richard, I just got off the phone with Robert. My sister's voice carried that careful tone she used when she was trying not to take sides. He's asking me to intervene. He says you've cut them off completely, and Jessica she's quite upset. I imagine she is. I clipped another dead bloom, watching the petals fall to the soil Margaret had lovingly enriched for years. He also mentioned something about you threatening to cut them out of your will entirely. Richard, is that true? I paused, pruning shears in hand. I didn't threaten anything, Carol. I simply made some legal adjustments that reflect current realities. Legal adjustments? Her voice rose slightly. Richard, what did you do? I updated my will. Margaret and I had left everything to Robert, assuming he'd use the inheritance responsibly, maybe set up college funds for the grandchildren, take care of the house and all the memories it contains. I moved to the next bush, remembering how Margaret used to hum while she worked in this same spot. But after recent events, I've decided to take a different approach, which is 50% goes to establish a scholarship fund in Margaret's name for students studying education. She always believed in the power of learning. 25% goes to the children's hospital where she volunteered. 20% goes to various charities we supported together, and 5% goes to Robert with very specific conditions. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to trim 3 more branches. 5%, Carol finally said. Richard, that's generous considering his behavior. I straightened, feeling the satisfaction of work well done. The 5% comes with requirements. He has to maintain a relationship with me that doesn't involve money. He has to bring the grandchildren to visit at least once a month for 2 years. He has to volunteer at one of the charities Margaret supported for at least 100 hours annually. And he has to write a letter to Margaret's grave every year on her birthday, telling her about the kind of man he's become. That's quite specific. Love requires effort, Carol. For 32 years, he's received love without giving any back. If he wants to benefit from what Margaret and I built together, he needs to learn what it means to contribute to something larger than himself. And if he doesn't meet these conditions, then his 5% gets distributed among the other beneficiaries, and he gets nothing. Not $1 of the money his mother spent decades protecting and growing. I could hear Carol taking a deep breath. He's not taking this well. Jessica is furious. She's talking about lawyers, about challenging the will, about how this isn't what Margaret would have wanted. A laugh escaped me, not bitter, just genuinely amused. Jessica is welcome to try. I had the documents prepared by the same firm that's handled our legal work for 20 years. Everything is airtight. And as for what Margaret would have wanted, I paused, remembering my wife's face during those final conversations about Robert's behavior. Margaret wanted him to grow up. She wanted him to become a man who understood the value of family, of commitment, of showing up when it matters. This will give him exactly what she wanted, a chance to earn his inheritance by becoming the person she always believed he could be. He says you're manipulating him with money the same way you accused him of manipulating you. The difference is that I'm asking him to give, not take. I'm asking him to show up, not disappear. I'm asking him to demonstrate love, not just demand it. I moved to Margaret's favorite climbing rose, the one she'd trained along the garden fence. If he thinks learning to be a decent human being is manipulation, then he's proven exactly why these conditions are necessary. Carol was quiet for a moment. What if he just walks away? What if he decides it's not worth it? Then I'll know that Jessica's influence has completely replaced his mother's, and I'll grieve that loss the same way I'm grieving Margaret. But I won't pretend that throwing money at him will bring back the son I raised. That boy died somewhere along the way, probably around the time he learned that want and need were the same thing. Richard, I loved that boy, Carol. I would have given him everything. But the man he became, the man who chose a party over his mother's funeral, that man needs to earn what he gets, and he needs to prove he remembers what family actually means. 3 days later, Robert showed up at my door, alone this time. His face was haggard, and his usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been wrestling with something larger than his usual concerns. Dad, we need to talk. Do we? I didn't invite him in immediately. After everything that had happened, courtesy had become something that needed to be earned rather than assumed. I heard about the will. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was struggling with a difficult decision. Carol told me about the conditions. And, he looked down at his feet, then back up at me. For the first time in years, I saw something in his expression that reminded me of the boy he used to be. I've been thinking about what you said, about showing up, about love being more than just taking. I waited. The thing is, I don't know how to do that anymore. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, every interaction with you and mom became about what I needed, what we needed. I stopped seeing you as people and started seeing you as resources. His voice cracked slightly, and I know that's fucked up. I know that's not who you raised me to be. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. The will, he continued, it's not about the money, is it? It's about whether I'm capable of being your son again instead of just your financial obligation. I studied his face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to, the practiced expressions designed to generate sympathy and compliance. But what I saw instead was something I hadn't seen in a decade: genuine remorse. The grandchildren miss you, he said quietly. Emma keeps asking why we don't visit Grandpa anymore. And when I try to explain it, I realize I can't because the truth is too ugly. The truth is that we only came around when we wanted something. I opened the door wider. Come in, Robert. We sat in the living room where so many of these conversations had taken place over the years, but this time felt different. The weight of expectation was gone, replaced by something more fragile and more real. Jessica thinks I should fight the will, he said. She thinks you're being vindictive and controlling. What do you think? I think. He paused, looking around the room that still held so many traces of his mother's presence. I think Mom would be proud of you for finally making me grow up, even if it took losing her for you to find the strength to do it. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we could cross. The conditions you set, he said finally, are they negotiable? No. He nodded slowly. Good, because if they were, I'd probably try to negotiate them down, and that would prove I still don't get it. He looked directly at me. I want to try, Dad. I want to try to be the man Mom thought I could become. I want my kids to know their grandfather as more than just the guy who used to give their parents money. It won't be easy, Robert. You've spent years building habits that prioritize taking over giving. Breaking those patterns will require real work. I know. He stood up, and for a moment, he looked like the young man who had once made me proud. But I also know that I've lost enough. I lost Mom because I was too selfish to prioritize her while she was alive. I'm not losing you too. After he left, I sat in Margaret's chair and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not certainty, not trust, but hope. And sometimes hope is enough to start rebuilding what seemed irreparably broken. The roses Margaret had planted were blooming again, like their petals catching the late afternoon light. She had always believed that with enough care and patience, even the most neglected garden could flourish again. Maybe she was right about more than just roses. As I watch Robert trying to become the man his mother always believed he could be, I've learned something about love that Margaret tried to teach me for years. Real love isn't about giving people everything they want. It's about believing they're strong enough to earn what they need. For too long, we confused enabling with caring, protection with love. Margaret's heart was in the right place, but her kindness became a cage that kept Robert from growing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people discover their own strength. The hardest lesson of all? Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what actually matters. Robert needed to lose his financial safety net to find his integrity, and I had to lose Margaret to find the courage to do what she never could: say no with love. Sitting here now, watching him wrestle with the reality of who he's become, I see glimpses of the boy Margaret and I raised, the boy who used to help her in the garden, who made me Father's Day cards with his tiny handprints, who cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. That boy is still there, buried under years of entitlement and enabling, but still there. I think about the will I've rewritten, the conditions I've set, and I know Margaret would understand. She always said that the hardest part of parenting was knowing when to hold on and when to let go. I held on too long to the hope that money could solve what only character could fix. But letting go, really letting go, means trusting that the foundation we built in those early years was strong enough to support him when everything else falls away. The irony isn't lost on me that it took Margaret's death to teach us both how to live. For 35 years, she was our family's emotional architect, building bridges where walls should have been, offering comfort where consequences were needed. She meant well, God knows she meant well. But love without boundaries becomes indulgence, and indulgence without limits becomes destruction. I wonder what Robert will choose. The conditions I've set aren't really about the money. They're about whether he's capable of becoming someone worthy of Margaret's memory. The volunteering, the visits, the letters to her grave, these aren't punishments. They're opportunities to remember what it feels like to give instead of take, to show up instead of disappear, to honor something larger than his immediate wants.